Hi, 5th graders. Welcome to Lesson 3.3, Compare and Order Decimals. The essential question for this lesson is, how can you use place value to compare and order decimals? Now, go ahead and open up in your Go Math workbooks to Lesson 3.3, found on page 57, and let's get started. Now, let's start out by taking a look at question number 1. As you can see, question number 1 has already been completed for us, but it's a good question for us to model the steps in how to compare and order decimals. So I'm going to start out by modeling step number 1. Step 1 says to line up the decimal points. So I'm going to go ahead and follow what step number 1 says, and I'm going to line up the decimal points. So I'm going to first of all write down my 4 and 735 thousandths. Down below that, I'm going to write down my second decimal number, which is 4 and 74 hundredths. So I've now completed step number 1, and I've lined up the decimal points. And as you can see, my decimal points are lined up. Now, the reason it's important to line up decimal points is to make sure you're comparing digits in the same place value position. Now, step number 2 says start at the left. So I'm going to start at the left, which means I'm going to start with my whole numbers on the left-hand side. Now, step 3 says to compare the digits in each place value position until the digits are different. Now, before I begin comparing the digits, what I want to do next is this, and this is a step that I like to take. What I notice is there's one more digit in that first number that I've written down. So to even things out, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to add a 0 behind my 4 so that it just evens out the digits. So both my numbers have the same number of digits. Now I'm going to go ahead and start comparing, and once again I'm going to start at the left. And what I notice is this. I notice that there are 2 4s in the ones place. So I can't do any comparing there because those numbers are equal. So I'm going to move on to my next numbers, and those are the numbers found now in the tenths place. Well, what I notice is that I have 2 7s found in the tenths place. So once again, those numbers are equal, so I can't compare there. So I'm going to move now on to my hundredths place, and what I notice is this. I notice that there is a 3 in the hundredths place in this problem, and there is a 4 in the hundredths place in this number. And what I know is this. I know that 3 is less than 4. And if 3 is less than 4, I know now that 4 and 735 thousandths is less than 4 and 74 hundredths. So once again, I'm going to follow my steps. I'm going to line up the decimal points. I'm going to start from the left, and then I'm going to compare the digits in each place value position until the digits are different. Okay, let's take a look at question number 7. Once again, our job is to compare and then to write less than, greater than, or equal to complete the sentence. Now, once again, I'm going to follow my steps, and I know that my first step tells me to line up the decimal points. So I'm going to go ahead and write down my 2 numbers, making sure that I'm lining up the decimals. So I have my first number, and now I have my second number. And what I know is, I know that I've made sure to line up those decimal points so that I know that I'm comparing digits in the same place value position. Now, what I also notice is this. In this problem, I have 2 numbers, but the first number has more digits than the second number. So I'm going to go ahead and even those 2 numbers out by adding a 0 behind my 4. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to begin following step number 2. And step number 2 says to start from the left. So I'm going to go ahead and start comparing digits on the left. And what I notice is in my ones place, I have a 1 here, and I also have a 1 here. Well, I know that 1 is equal to 1, so I cannot compare in the ones place. So I'm going to move to my next place value position, and that is the tenths place. In the tenths place, I have a 5 here, and I also have a 5 here. And what I know is 5 is equal to 5, so I cannot compare my numbers using the tenths place. So I'm now going to move next to my hundredths place. Well, what I notice is this. In the hundredths place, I have different digits. I have a 3 here, and I have a 4 here. So what I know is this. I know that 3 is less than 4. And if I know that 3 is less than 4, what I also know is this. I know that 1 and 538 thousandths is going to be less than, and we'll go ahead and write the less than symbol in there. It's less than 1 and 54 hundredths. Now, let's take a look at question number 10. The directions are a little different this time. The directions say to order the numbers from greatest to least. So I need my biggest number first. Once again, we're ordering from greatest, and then we're making our way to the least or the smallest number. Now, I'm going to follow the same steps that I use when I'm comparing two numbers, and the first step in comparing those numbers is to line up the decimal points. So I'm going to go ahead and come down here, and I'm going to write my numbers down, making sure that I am lining up my decimals. So there's our first number. Here is our second number. Here is our third number. And then here is the fourth number. Now, I need to make sure, once again, this is an important step, make sure that your decimal points are lined up. And once again, the reason you want to make sure your decimal points are lined up is to make sure you're comparing digits in the same place value position. And I know by looking at my numbers that my decimal points are lined up. Now, before I begin comparing, I also want to do a little something else. In looking at my numbers, I notice that these first two numbers, they all have 3 digits behind the decimal, and my last two numbers only have 2 digits behind the decimal. So I'm going to go ahead and even those out, and I'm going to add a 0 here behind the 9. Let's go ahead and write the 0 down. So I'm going to add a 0 behind the 9, and I'm also going to add a 0 behind the 8. And that just evens things out and makes it a little easier as I work to compare in order. Now, we're going to go ahead and begin by looking at the numbers on the left. And what I notice is I notice that I have all 3's in the ones place. Well, I know that 3 is equal to 3 is equal to 3 is equal to 3. So I can't compare using the numbers that are in the ones place. So I'm going to go ahead now and move to the tenths place. Here I have a 0, an 8, a 0, and a 1. So what I notice is that I now have different digits in the tenths place. So I'm going to go ahead and underline those numbers. I have a 0, an 8, a 0, and a 1. And what I can now do is I can start ordering from greatest to least. Because when I look at those numbers, what I know is this. I know that 8 is greater than the 0 here, the 0 here, and the 1 here. So I know that this number is going to be my greatest number. So I'm going to go ahead and write that number down as my greatest number in ordering from greatest to least. So I'm going to go ahead and write down 3 and 825 thousandths because that is my greatest number. Now I'm going to go ahead and cross that number off my list because I know that that is my greatest number. Now let's take a look again at those digits in the tenths place. I have my 0, and my 1. And what I know is 1 is greater than this 0, and it's greater than this 0. So I know what the second number in my list should be. So I'm going to go ahead and write this number down in my list. So I'm now going to write down 3 and 18 hundredths. And then I'm going to go ahead and cross this number off my list. Now, in looking back at my numbers, I'm left with a 0 and a 0 in the tenths place. Well, I know that 0 is equal to 0, so I cannot compare in the tenths place, so I'm going to move now to the hundredths place. And what I see is I have a 0 here, and I have a 9 here. What I know is that 9 is greater than 0. And if I know that 9 is greater than 0, I know that this number is going to come next on my list. So I'm going to go ahead and write that number down next, and that number is 3 and 9 hundredths. And I'm going to go ahead and cross that number off my list. Well, that leaves me then with 3 and 8 thousandths as my least or lowest number. So in order from greatest to least, I have 3 and 825 thousandths, I have 3 and 18 hundredths, I have 3 and 9 hundredths, and then I have 3 and 8 thousandths. And that is my order from greatest to least. Now, let's take a look at question number 15. The directions say to find the unknown digit to make each statement true. Now, let's take a look at what's given. For number 15, I have first of all 5 and 723 thousandths is less than 5 and 720 blank thousandths, which is less than 5 and 725 thousandths. So let's take a look at what we know. I know that when I'm comparing these numbers, I'm going to start from the left, and I know that I have a 5 in the ones place here, and a 5 in the ones place here, and also a 5 in the ones place here. So I know that those numbers are equal to each other. So I'm now going to move to the tenths place, and what I notice is I have a 7 in the tenths place here, a 7 in the tenths place here, and also a 7 in the tenths place here. So once again, 7 is equal to 7. Those numbers are the same. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the numbers in the hundredths place. I have a 2 in the hundredths place here, a 2 in the hundredths place here, and also a 2 in the hundredths place here. Once again, I know that those numbers are equal to each other. 2 is equal to 2 is equal to 2. Now, let's focus on the numbers that are in the thousandths place. And what I notice is this. I notice that I have a 3 in the thousandths place here. I don't know what I should have in the thousandths place here yet, but I know that I have a 5 here. So what they're telling me is that 3 is less than an unknown number, which is less than 5. And if I use my basic number sense, what I know is I know that 3 is less than a 4, which is less than 5. So I know by using that basic number sense that I should have a 4 as my missing digit in this problem that would make the statement true. So what that tells me is 5 and 723 thousandths is less than 5 and 724 thousandths, which is less than 5 and 725 thousandths. So I have now found the unknown digit to make the statement true, and that digit was the 4, because once again, 3 is less than 4, and 4 is less than 5. Now, let's take a look at question number 17. It's one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and number 17 says, the completion times for 3 runners in a 100-yard dash are 9 and 7/500 seconds, 9 and 7/10 seconds, and 9 and 675 thousandths seconds. Which is the winning time? Now, I know as I read through that problem, there are 3 different times given for 3 different runners. So what I know is this. I know that the first time was 9 and 7/500 seconds, the second time was 9 and 7/10 seconds, and the third time was 9 and 675 thousandths seconds. Now, my job is to find the winning time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to compare those 3 times. So I'm going to follow my steps, and I know that step number 1 tells me to write the numbers down, making sure that I've lined up the decimals. So I'm going to write down my first time. So here's time number 1. Then I have my second time, and then here is the third time. Now, what I notice is that the digits are not even. So I'm going to go ahead and add some zeros in to even things out to make sure that all of my numbers have the same amount of digits. It just makes it easier as we're comparing and ordering. Now, I'm going to once again move on to step number 2, and step 2 says to start from the left. Well, on the left, all of my numbers are 9s, so I cannot do any comparing at this point. So I'm going to move on to the tenths place. And in the tens place, I see that I have a 7, a 7, and a 6. So I see that my digits are different in the tens place. So I'm going to underline those numbers because they are different. Now, what I know is this. I'm looking once again for the winning time. And if you're running a race, think about this. If you have the winning time, is your time the greatest number or is your time the least number? And what I know is if I'm looking for the winning time, I want the number that is the lowest number. That means you're the fastest runner. So when I look at the three numbers that are given, what I know is that this number that has the 6 in the tens place is my least or lowest number, which means that person had the fastest time, which means they had the winning time. So I'm going to write that number down as my winning time, and that number is 9 and 675 thousandths seconds. And that is my winning time. Now, let's take a look at question number 18. It's another one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and number 18 says, in a discus competition, an athlete threw the discus 63 and 37 hundredths meters, 62 and 95 hundredths meters, and 63 and 7 tenths meters. Order the distances from least to greatest. So what I notice is this, as I'm reading through that problem, there are 3 different distances that this person has thrown. So I have my first distance here, my second distance here, and my third distance here. Now it says to order the distances from least to greatest. So I need to put these numbers in order from least, my lowest number, to my greatest number. So I'm going to go ahead and begin doing that and start with step number 1. Well, I know that step number 1 says line up the decimals. So I'm going to write my decimal numbers down, making sure that I'm lining up my decimal points. So I have my first number, and then here is the second number, and then here is the third number. Now, before I start comparing once again, I notice that my third distance has less digits than the other two. So I'm going to go ahead and add a 0 just to even things out. So they all now have the same number of digits. Now, step 2 says start from the left. So I'm going to start here in the tens place, and what I notice is that I have all 6s in the tens place. So I can't do any comparing here in the tens place, so I'm now going to move over to the ones place. And what I notice in the ones place is that I have a 3, a 2, and a 3. Now I'm going to go ahead and underline those digits because they are different. I have a 3, a 2, and a 3. And if I'm going to order from least to greatest, what I know is that 2 is my least number. So I'm going to go ahead and write that number down as the lowest or least number on my list. And that number, once again, is 62 and 95 hundredths, and we'll add the M for meters. And then I'm going to go ahead and cross that number off my list. Now, let's take a look at the 2 numbers that remain. I'm going to now focus on the numbers that are in the tenths place. And what I notice is that the numbers that are in the tenths place, they have different digits. So I'm going to go ahead and underline those 2. I have a 3 and I have a 7. Well, what I know is I know that 3 is less than 7. And if 3 is less than 7, I know now that this number, this distance, is less than this distance. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to my list, and the next number that I write down is going to be 63 and 37 hundredths meters. And then I'm going to take that one off my list. Now that leaves me with 63 and 7 tenths meters. And what I have now done is I've ordered the distances from least to greatest. And from least to greatest, I have 62 and 95 hundredths meters. I have 63 and 37 hundredths meters. And then I have 63 7/10 meters, and once again they're ordered from least to greatest. Now, let's take a look at your homework questions for tonight. I would like you to complete question number 1 and question number 2, as well as numbers 3 through 6. And these homework questions can be found on page 58 in your Go Math workbook. Now, don't forget, somewhere on your homework page I want you to let me know, do you feel like you're number 1 a novice, number 2 an apprentice, number 3 a practitioner, or number 4 an expert? Don't forget, your homework questions for tonight will be to complete number 1 and number 2, as well as numbers 3 through 6, found on page 58 in your Go Math workbook. I hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you at school tomorrow.